Welcome everyone to Destination Dissertation. This is Dr. Theresa Haskins, and we're going to interview her today and ask her some very poignant questions about what led her to get her doctorate and all the world surrounding her and her educational journey. Before we begin, even though she is a former student of USC and I am a current student of USC, the views expressed in this interview are not endorsed or any way connected to USC. All right, so how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jerome. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm very excited. It's a blessing to just be alive, to be able to communicate and talk to people. So I'm very excited about this interview. So if we can begin with the first question is, can you talk a little bit about your educational journey, what kind of the steps you took and the path along to get your doctorate?
So my journey to education and obtaining a doctorate of education wasn't traditional. I actually started my career in finance and my education in sociology, and was really looking at how groups of behavior interact and behave, and what shapes behavior, what shapes group behavior. Over time, that as I worked through the organization and worked more with people, I really came to the conclusion that most educators already know, that all behavior is shaped by learning, how we learn, whether that's formal and traditional settings or even at home in cultural-based learning. And so as I've been with my organization for 22 years, and as my education evolved, so did my career. And because I discovered on my own, for my own learning, that the learning is the center of all human behavior, and it's an opportunity to help shape lives, I went more towards how I can help shape behavior and learning within my own organization. I got my degree in educational psychology at Eastern Michigan University. That's when I transitioned to a formal training role within my current organization. And now I work on large-scale cultural transformations in the organization and looking to help increase diversity, especially in the disability inclusion space, but just to support people of all abilities to be successful in organizations as we seem to readily shift to a more virtual, inclusive work environment.
Now, as far as what you're currently doing now, obviously it's on an organizational level. Can you share with the viewers what you do now and how it connects to what your research has been?
Okay. So I have two hats. I have, and many of you in doctoral studies will find that you may also pursue two routes and maintain both. So my primary job is I'm vice president at JP Morgan Chase of Learning and Talent Solutions, where I oversee change management strategies and communications across the enterprise. So what we look at is if there's a technological change or some significant deployment that's going to impact learners and employees, my team helps shape that change strategy and communication. Before that, I led learning and development strategies for the commercial banking organization within the organization. And I also worked with our BRGs, a business resource group, and worked with them on disability inclusion, predominantly in the autism inclusion space. On the other side, since about 2011, I did some research on motivational strategies and choice to influence autonomy to learn and directional behavior. My research was with children, but I was able to apply it in the workplace. It really worked well with disengaged and apathetic workers. And so what I found is I started a small consulting firm where I work with educational institutions and nonprofits to develop leadership that can implement these practices successfully. With my latest research, I focused more on how to create disability, diversity, inclusive cultures and the management practices that would be applied to be universal. And so now I also consult in those areas.
And that is good stuff, as we're going to dig into later. I have a little foreknowledge now of that. So that's really good stuff. Now, you're based in Ohio, correct?
I am based in Ohio, correct.
So why did you end up choosing USC to pursue your doctoral degree?
So I chose USC and the OCL program specifically for a multitude of reasons. One, the Rossier School of Education is renowned to be top in the field, and they have a long-standing tradition of quality education. I felt based on the program description, I was able to do a traditional dissertation, which a lot of programs do not do. They do more of a capstone project. And I felt it would challenge me and enable to gain a deeper understanding and lead in research in an area that I was passionate about. I also allowed me the opportunity to attend a premier program remotely. There were other programs that I looked into that would require me to relocate, whether that was on the West Coast or the East Coast. And being able to maintain my current employment, I've been with my company for 22 years, not having to relocate my family, but still pursue my own aspirations was a significant factor in my choice of school.
Absolutely. I vouch for USC as well, and totally understand. And with the current situation we're going through with the COVID-19, those who have kind of geared their life to work remotely seem to be a little bit more prepared for the changes we're going through. Would you agree?
I would agree. I've been working remotely. JP Morgan's predominantly a New York, Chicago, London, Hong Kong based company. I've been working remotely for them for about 7 years now. And I think that the transition to work from home requires a little bit of thought, especially if you're extroverted. Some people feel like they may lose the connection. I think technology helps bridge that gap wonderfully. I've developed, I think, a really great relationship with Jerome. This isn't the first time we've spoke, and you wouldn't have been able to do that without technology, a decade ago. I think my advice to people working remotely right now, knowing that you're juggling kids, which is a little bit different than a normal remote work or remote school setup, is just it's really time management and thoughtfulness and planning, working with your family's routines and schedules and learning how to make your work and life shape around that. I think a lot of times traditionally, when you think about your day-to-day schedule, you're working on other schedules. You're working on the school-based schedule, the bus schedule, you being needing to be at work at 8 o'clock. And once you're at home, you can really think differently about how you manage your time, and you can do it more effectively and take advantage of the commute time that you just gained during these next few weeks. Absolutely.
That is true. There's no commute time, so that's great. Now let's get into the 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 focus of your dissertation.
Yes.
What was your focus of your dissertation, and kind of how did it evolve?
So my dissertation is focused on how managers at organizations with autism employment programs were able to effectively support autistic employees. Um, I specifically want to see how managers were able to do this because regardless of disability or not, managers make or break the employee manager experience. And a lot of research right now shows about how we onboard people, but research was also showing that we couldn't retain and sustain that employment. So the study was designed as a promising practice field study, which is a bit different, and explored management practices at 5 different organizations. And what was significant about those findings is that regardless of the training or size of the organization, and some of these were large Fortune 100 companies, the managers interviewed all came to the same conclusions about the most effective practices that could be implemented to make their employees successful. So the research allowed me to identify consistency in the type of work and organizational constructs that are needed to support employees with autism that also showed could be universally applied to all employees to increase job satisfaction and motivation, which is near and dear to my heart. And for me, it's really important to look at this subgroup because I have a son with autism. It has guided most of my research, both in my master's and doctoral programs. A lot of efforts go into when they're young and how you're going to make them able to be educated, but now we need to think of the flip side. And if they have degrees and they have learned to integrate a bit more effectively with neurotypical people, how are we going to employ them so that they can be independent adults?
Yes, and I had, like I said, I had the opportunity to speak with you before. I think you said something. You said a lot of things that really just were just explosive as far as your thought and the clarity of it. But what you said in particular just was a light bulb moment for me. So a lot of times we preach diversity, but it's not necessarily and I don't want to, I want to say it, I want you to explain it, but sometimes we have, we're inclusive, but we don't, we're bringing people in that are exactly the same as versus true diverse. Can you explain what you said as far as work culture and just the difference?
Yes. So the reason why I focus on autism, not just because of my son, but when we think about people with autism or any sort of neurodiversity, and by neurodiversity, I'm not saying I have a different opinion, but actually my wiring has me process information so differently that I cannot assimilate to think or behave like you do. And it's one of the biggest challenges with people with autism. And then I'll answer your question more directly, Jerome. One of the biggest challenges with people with autism is they will never be able to assimilate fully and behave like you do, because that is actually the disability. They can look like you, but they will never behave like you. And so what Jerome is referring to is I talk about the concept of superficial diversity. It's a bit of a rough way to approach it, but what that means is a lot of diversity initiatives are looking at marking off boxes to say, how many Black people do we have? How many women do we have in leadership? What is our proportion of ethnicities? What is our proportion of people of color? What is our proportion of people of different races and creeds? And that's what people look at. But what we look, if you think and you look further, you may have diversity, but I think the example I used, Jerome, was a crayon box. And so diversity has now become, instead of having just a bunch of blue crayons, we have crayons in all different shapes and sizes and colors, but they're still crayons. And for autism for people with autism to be able to work in a workplace, you have to be able to accept true diversity and not looking for people who maybe look differently than you, but think differently than you. And so we're talking about not just crayons, but we need markers and paints and watercolors. And true diversity would be accepting people with the skills to do the job that you may not have cultural sameness with, they may not think the way you do, but that you bring this variety to the table and can learn how to work with that together. It's really looking at talent from the skills and scope of role and not that connection. And for any of you who have ever conducted an interview or worked with colleagues, one of the things that people will say and recruiters will tell you is, you weren't a cultural fit. And when you're saying somebody's not a cultural fit, what you're saying is they don't fit the way you behave. You didn't have a interpersonal connection, which, by the way, is one of the problems with autism. They have a hard time with extroverted interpersonal communications. And so if we can get past with, Jerome and I do not have to be friends to work effectively together. Jerome and I do not have to approach work the same way to be effective in doing a job. So when I say we need to get beyond superficial diversity, I'm saying exactly that. When you say somebody's not a cultural fit, challenge yourself, because are you saying they don't think like me? Because just because people look differently or came from somewhere else doesn't mean they haven't assimilated, it's not a word we like, to be like you and just look differently. And I would challenge all of you that when you think about diversity, are we thinking about diversity in terms of checking off how many crayons do I have in the box? Or am I really saying I have a palette of differences that bring variety to the table? And if you can get past superficial diversity and really embrace differences, that's where innovation comes from. That's where creativity comes from, because you have to approach everything differently. And if I can get organizations to see that if you can accommodate those type of differences, everything they strive and aspire for will actually become a reality. I'm passionate and passionate out, and we'll get out into that here shortly. Yeah.
Wow. Uh, Dr. Cash in one of my classes, when he would hear something good, he would just say, wow. And I have to say, wow, because you're really, you've really opened up a door that it's sometimes difficult for us as human beings to really see ourselves from the outside. And so when you talk about, cultural, organizational culture, that's huge. And the concept where you said do they think like us? The question is, are we going to be brave enough in organizations that have people that don't necessarily think like us? But the focus is the skill. Do they have the skill to do the job? So I just think that for those who see the video, this is huge, and in particular, you can go big or small in the more acute sense. I have friends and family that have members who have autism, and that's almost like it's a no-win situation if you're going to say they don't act like us, but that's literally what their challenge is. So that's amazing that you put this work together. And then on a global sense, we do have many different things. You have social cultural norms that we consider norms, and or, you have someone who might be of a different faith, and maybe they have based on certain different situations, they may present themselves differently based on their faith, or even like in conversation we talk about people who are overweight. That could be something like, oh, you don't look like us, and it's like, okay, that can be things that people. So I just think what you're talking about are huge topics, and I love the fact that you encourage it through innovation, saying we need to innovate, we need to develop. Just powerful. I just got to do a wow on that one.
Well, and it's relevant because there are some people that are like, why autism? Why not other disabilities? Because it's a relevant word right now with COVID and the word pandemic. 1 in 58 children are now being diagnosed with autism, and they grow up to be adults. I think a lot of times people forget that we talk about the rate of childhood diagnosis, but that 1 in 58 will be 1 in every 58 adults you will know in 20 years will have autism. If they cannot be employed, then they will be a burden on a system. So it is to everybody's benefit, not just the people with autism and their families, that we as a society learn how to adapt. And that requires change, and it requires us to think differently. And I think one of the things that's interesting is people talk about inclusion and thinking differently, but in leadership courses you will hear about how important it is to have high EQ and high empathy. And I think as leaders, we need to have that. You need to understand that people with autism may not. And that's where you make the difference. You need to be aware of your assertions and your assumptions and catch yourself when you're behaving in a way that might actually be contrary to what you're striving to do. I can go on forever, Jerome.
No, I mean it's a empirical work. It's a top. What you done was amazing, and I don't just think so. USC also thought so as well, and so you were named. Your work was the 2019 Dissertation of the Year. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found out, what was the process, and just your general emotional reaction?
Well, I was excited to be nominated. It's one of those things that it chooses you. You don't choose it. And just the nomination to me felt like I won, because the nomination meant that my chair and committee raised my work to the larger program as being worthy for consideration. So for me, just the nomination, but receiving the award really validated to me the importance of my research topic. I know that the dissertation it's not just topic, it's how it was written, the methodology chosen, pretty much the quality of the research and how it's presented. But for me, it validated the importance of my topic. I felt recognized for my passion. I felt recognized for my time. I do recognize that there were other very worthy candidates that were nominated, and they too have just as much passion and rigor in their research, and they should be recognized. And I'm friends with many of them. And well, of that cohort, not every. But for me, it was the importance and awareness. It drove some awareness on my topic, right? And I kind of asked for a more rewarding time to my end at USC. What I would tell anybody, because you asked about the process, so my recommendation to somebody is dissertation shouldn't be written with the award in mind. I'm grateful for it, but if you want to think about what makes a Dissertation of the Year award, my colleague Gamaliel Bear also was nominated in 2019 and awarded in 2019. But when I think about the dissertations that have won over the years, the key is passion and rigor. So pick a topic that means something to you first, because it's a long haul. You're going to spend 2 to 3 years, depending on some potential speed bumps that you may or may not know will exist until you get through the process, that you really are passionate about, because you will be writing on this topic for years. And there are days it's going to seem daunting. As much as passion as you have, you're going to be like, this paper, this book actually will never end. The second thing is, you really need to integrate all of your efforts towards it. So you're going to be in classes where they will have you write different components. You'll take a diversity class maybe, or an economics class that you may or may not think is relevant to your topic, but think differently. What I found to be successful is to take every class I had, and when they had me write a section that may or may not be relevant in my mind to the dissertation, to explore that area of it, which is why I start talking about the socioeconomic impacts of not addressing the issue. Had I not taken an economics class, maybe I wouldn't have explored that route. And it's not just writing that component in your dissertation, but then looking at your review of research and expanding and exploring. The passion you put into your dissertation should translate to the passion out from the reader, because you have to remember your committee isn't on your journey with you hand in hand. They're learning through your writing. And so you really want to make sure that, you may write a section, you're like, I do not want to write my methodology section. It's so painful. But that methodology, I can tell you that the key to a great dissertation is a phenomenal proposal. And the best defense is a solid paper. If your paper is sound, you should have nothing to defend. So as you go through the process of writing your dissertation, focus on the proposal, not that I want to start doing research, but how you're really going to conduct the research. What type of data you really think you're going to gain from that? Is it sound? If you weren't creating it, would you believe you? If you're really thoughtful, you won't have much to defend. My proposal defense was 29 minutes. And when your final defense comes, they should be asking questions and thoughtfulness, not challenging your reasons. Because if your methodology was sound, now you're just talking about your results. So a strong dissertation comes from taking the time to be thoughtful. Do not rush the process. It is not a race. If your peers are ahead of you, that is okay. If you find you need to take a month off and think, I did it, that's okay. And just make sure that you feel that what your intent is being represented in your work. And if you find that as you're going, you feel stuck, reach out to your chair, reach out to peers. Editing is your friend, and know that editing is not a personal process. And that's how I think you get to the table. It's really, this is you. This is the first time that will be, for many of you, it could be your first body of work that it stands alone. And it needs to stand alone so it can sit on your bookshelf with pride. And if you do all that, then maybe you might be nominated.
Wow, those are just jewels. I have a saying that I believe that wisdom is key information given to the right person at the right time. And I think you have an abundance of wisdom. And for anyone who watches this video, this is it's passion in, passion out, as you talk about. You really, your work as a professional and as an academic has been passionate, and it kicks out this way. So as a person who, I've read your dissertation, as a person who, just in meeting you and just in conversations, you really understand what it's about, and it comes out. And then you just start dropping jewels for anybody to just pick up on the ground and say, hey, this is great. So, I mean, the key to a great dissertation is a good proposal. Best defense is a solid paper. And so you make things simple. And, for someone who's ever thinking about pursuing their doctorate degree. I think this is a video that I hope you share with others to thinking about it, because this is the correct mindset, in my opinion, that you need to have, what Dr. Haskins is sharing. So your world is infinite. Your ideas are relevant and so needed in today's markets that we all interact with. What is next for you in the future? What are your plans professionally as far as what you want to do?
So the plans for the future of my work. So I want to continue to get the word out. I'm working on some ideas. I have some conference speaking engagements later this year where I'll be talking about weaving diversity inclusion into the learning and business agenda. I'm working to potentially do some more speaking engagements on management and inclusion practices. I'm working to break up my dissertation into tangible pieces so that they could be published in journals and received, most importantly, by the people that need them. One of the challenges with autism employment initiatives, and a lot of them were started in 2012, you've probably heard of them. Some very big names have those programs. And one of the things that has happened is there's this assumption that, well, you have to be this giant corporation for it to be relevant, or you have to hire a person with autism for coding purposes. And I want to break those myths. I want to inform people that it does not take a lot of money to onboard these folks. If any, it's really thoughtful, adaptive management practices that we were able to isolate and identify through my research. And there's other folks that are expanding on that research now, which is very exciting. And that it doesn't have to be difficult, and you don't have to be a Fortune 100 company to be successful. And there's a lot of different process-oriented jobs that folks with autism can be successful in. And so it's really, when I talk to managers, I want to promote this idea that you need to think differently about work. We need to think differently about workplace culture, and really focus on the skills you need for the job. When we start looking at skills-based recruiting, I think you'll find that the door will open to a lot more talent for everyone.
Agreed. So if I'm someone, a superintendent or a CEO, or I'm in charge of organizational movement, how can and I'll also share this information at the end of the video and the credits as well, but how can they get in contact with you if they would like to reach out to you on some consultation work?
I'm easily accessible. If you're not, I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Theresa Haskins. I can be emailed at thaskins@usc.edu, and then I'm working on a website that is evolving, and it's www.haskinsconsult.com. At the end of the day, I would just ask people to, step one, think about your culture and what you're aspiring to do. And once you know what your goals are, let's start talking and thinking differently about how we manage people and how we look at talent. I mean, really, that's the key at the end of the day. As educators, we have inclusive classrooms. We have learned that they have the capacity to learn, and we're developing programs. Colleges are supporting them. But this is a lot like teaching students. Where we are right now is let's pretend that they're blind. We've come up with Braille, we have taught students Braille, but until an employer is going to build the constructs for that employee to work effectively in their office by providing some sort of audio support or Braille for them to read, they will not be able to be employed. So it's the 1970s all over again. We need to get the wheelchair ramps and the elevators in the building so they can actually work on the 30th floor. It is time for organizations to meet educators at the table halfway. You are preparing them. They have the capabilities, they have the educations, they have the skill set and the motivation. Organizations have to build the constructs for them to get through the door.
Perfectly said.
We can
Perfectly
do it
said.
together.
Listen, it's more than a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I think that our conversations will continue. I'm looking forward to staying in contact with you because your work, as I stated before, is truly special, and it's needed for this day and age. And the way you're able to explain it, I think a lot of times when issues are addressed that don't apply to individuals, it may be more difficult to receive. But the way you're able to kind of translate that and say, hey, a box of crayons and things like that, I think that really helps the common person be able to understand it. And then obviously your academic work is amazing. For those of you guys that do look up dissertations, please look her dissertation up. It's worth the read. So thank you, Dr. Haskins, for joining us for Destination Dissertation. And please stay in contact with us because we know you are definitely a world changer.
Thank you, Jerome.
Take care.
You too.